So I'm going to start off by sharing our presentation. We're going to go from there. Now, as we go through, by all means, you've got the Q&A element on the Zoom meeting that you can throw questions up, and depending on where we are in the presentation, I'll be more than happy to answer them on the fly, or we do have a Q&A section at the end. So can everybody see that presentation? Just a thumbs up, somebody in the chat would be good. Yeah, okay, all good. All right, so we're going to kick into it. And welcome to Dialog's Thought Leadership series of webinars. The very first one that we're kicking off with is mine. And in this case, I'll be both your host and the presenter for this. Going forward, we're going to do these every month. And I'll be hosting most of the ones going forward, but we'll have some of the other members of Dialog's executive team presenting their topics on each of those months. It'll typically be the first Thursday of each month as we go in, just like today's is. So we'll dive into it. And first of all, I'll very quickly introduce myself. So my name's Glenn Irvine. I am the head of Cloud and Emerging Technologies at Dialog, and I look after the Cloud and Emerging Technologies practice, which is a centre of excellence inside Dialog. I'll do a brief intro of Dialog after this, but effectively what our practice does is provide that specialist advisory consulting, licensing and services to clients who require innovative cloud native and or emerging technologies that effectively we believe have a transformative capability or business outcomes for those organisations and for the organisations who are our customers as such. Now, broader Dialog is that we are largely a privately owned IT services company of about 1,100 odd consultants across Australia now, operating for about 40 odd years, and good organic and acquisition growth throughout that time. Has always been a very solid company. You can see that not only do we provide strategic consulting and full life cycle application development, etc., but we do provide other solutions and managed applications as well. And we have a number of subsidiary companies and centres of excellence within the Dialog organisation itself that provide specialist skills like ICE Media, Catapult BI, Access HQ, etc., who do provide each of their unique services there. ICE Media is largely web development. Catapult BI is a business intelligence group, and Access HQ is pretty much what it says in their slogan, assurance and testing of solutions. And we do have clients across all government levels and industries as such. There's our contact details very quickly. Essentially, you can contact us on that email address or via our main website or our 1-800 number at the Australian head office here in Brisbane. And likewise, we do have some very strong vendor partners. So you can see just across there, most of the main cloud players as such, plus some of the emerging vendors like Monday.com, RingCentral, etc., Okta, who are all bringing, innovative cloud solutions to the market as such. We also have great client partnerships. So, and some of these have spanned decades. With some of the larger organisations that we've dealt with and some of the larger federal agencies, etc., they have literally spanned decades, and we have great relationships. And Dialog is very strongly a relationship-focused company. So on to the webinar series itself, and today's topic is the Transformative Cloud Collaboration Maturity Model. Now, this is a maturity model that we use predominantly in the Cloud and Emerging Technologies practice, and we'll give you a bit of a glimpse into what that is about today. So at a glance, it effectively is a 3-level maturity model, and we'll go through some of the details around it, operating over 5 different streams of and or domains of operation in an organisation. And we will talk about what the maturity model is about, but a lot of this has stemmed from our experience over the last several years, assisting customers moving through their technology maturity, particularly in the collaborative solutions sort of space. But a little bit of what brought us here and what's driving this at the moment. And some of this is really some of the history of what we've seen over the last few months with the advent of COVID-19 and the crisis it created as well. So one of the things we can see here is we're being forced into the world's largest work from home experiment. And so far, it hasn't been easy for a lot of organisations to implement. In April, Gartner produced a survey across HR, largely related to the COVID crisis. And one of the things they came up with was that 41% of employees are likely to work remotely at least some of the time post the pandemic. So we've seen a shift in organisations having to cope with the fact that nearly half of their employees may be working from home, or at least in a remote basis going forward, and not just through the crisis, but on an ongoing basis. Likewise, a CFO survey in April by Gartner again revealed that 74% of CFOs intend to shift some employees to remote work permanently. What that largely is driving at is that those organisations, and particularly the financial side of those organisations, have seen that there is a cost benefit in doing this. Clearly, the obvious ones is office space and whatnot. But for 3/4 of CFOs in that survey to say, look, we're seriously considering this going forward, that is something for an organisation to seriously consider going forward, is how they might actually address that and how they might support that requirement. Finally, a Forrester pandemic survey as well. This one was of Australian teleworkers. And probably the key thing down there, I'll let you read that, but effectively, only 54% of those teleworkers believe their firms have the technology resources to support working from home. So what they're basically saying is that half of all of our organisations here in Australia were not ready for this. They did not have the right technology in place, and they basically stumbled through the crisis and just got through it. So there's a huge opportunity there in that sense as well, that organisations will need to be looking at how they enable their workers for telework, and particularly this work from home type phenomenon. Okay, let's have a quick look at what the maturity model is about. And as I said, one of our key focuses with our practice here is enabling telework and corporate mobility, and of course, without compromise. One of the clear things that we saw through this period of time was a lot of organisations did a real hurry up to roll out, for instance, teleconferencing. But the thing that went on the back burner was looking at security, looking at the due diligence that was around putting those sort of measures in place, not just technology-wise, but also operationally. And one of the things that we'd like to bring is a sense of maturity in practice when an organisation is doing that. So some of the domains that we explored through this period was organisations that were exploring zero trust network. So essentially setting up their infrastructure to support a work from anywhere kind of basis as such. And it's something that we well and truly recommend, and certainly feel that a lot of organisations should look towards enabling their organisations with a zero trust approach. Likewise, user productivity enablement, and that was a key area. So cloud and virtualized desktops were key areas there where we've got people working from home, and now we have to look at how they're going to share that document, or how are they going to work collaboratively on a document, etc., which historically was on the G drive inside your file share. Distributed contact center was an area that was of significant interest, in the sense that a lot of organizations who had on-premise contact centers had to use a methodology that effectively just forwarded those calls onto mobiles at the worker's home. And a lot of functionality was lost in the process of doing that. So being able to shift to a cloud contact center type technology was an obvious need that might come out of that. Workflow support, and particularly of distributed processes and delegations. So this is classically where you need that signature on the form. And being able to push that into a process that will work from a work from home kind of mode of operations, but will support that with electronic delegations and authorizations, etc. So being able to put that sort of workflow support in was important and key. Remote access to the corporate infrastructure. So being able to provide secure access to the corporate infrastructure for those things that couldn't be cloud enabled or provided on a remote basis was another area. And of course, the validation of endpoint workstations in the consumer setting. So it's one thing to open up, say, a VPN to your corporate infrastructure, but you also want to make sure that that user's home computer has not been compromised. Things like technical enablement of secure remote access. So being able to give that to our staff to be able to access what technologies they need as well. And likewise, another thing that's starting to be examined is things like work hubs and establishing home working baselines, not only technology-wise, but also policy and procedure-wise. And of course, corporate globalization and mobility. And when we're looking at things cloud, we're also talking about 24/7 and also things like evergreen technologies as part of the mix. So these are all the areas that were of interest and certainly had a focus on while we were going through the COVID crisis. Some of the primary business benefits as we look across the maturity models. At that stage one is where many organizations operate or at least have been operating. And we're looking at a simple case of increasing agility there. So most operations are here. They're looking at shifts to cloud provide agility and swift scaling, and it's pretty much a baseline for the organization to measure itself against. As we shift into stage 2 around a collaboration or a cloud collaboration maturity, we're starting to look at increases in productivity. So we're pushing more of the productivity tools into cloud. We're looking at those first real benefits in enabling staff. This is really where it starts to make sense because we're no longer having to worry about it takes me 5 minutes to save that document back onto the G drive through the VPN, that sort of thing. We're reducing silos and unproductive restrictions. And we're also looking at mobility and cost savings. And again, this is where those CFOs were starting to look at, okay, well, we're starting to push out costs. We no longer have to worry about housing staff, that sort of thing. Stage 3. This is where we're starting to look at an increase in competitive capability. So from that perspective, we're talking about competitive agility and speed to market, the ability to make shifts very fast and in an agile way, and also to give executive visibility and the ability to nudge processes, which is quite important really at that stage and that level of maturity. We are looking at organisations that are chasing market leadership and dominance at that point. So let's have a look at what the streams are in the transformative cloud collaboration maturity model. We're essentially dealing with productivity, communications, workflow, security of the platforms, and the workspace itself. So as we go across that, one of the things that we're going to use is a metaphor around these 3 levels. And the way we're going to look at it is the way that, in this case, certain animals in the animal kingdom collaborate. So if we looked at level 1 as the equivalent of a nest of ants and the way they can work collaboratively together, but it does look like a bit of a jumble and there's not much sophistication to it. Progressing into level 2, we're starting to see something that's a little bit more like a beehive, and we're essentially got orchestration going on. We're starting to see various processes starting to be shaped that create collaboration between, in this case, the bees. Things like, their ability to direct where there's value out in their case, a forest where they're looking for pollen, etc. And finally, we're shifting to that level 3 is like a murmur of starlings, where everything seems to be shifting agilely, almost as if with a common mind, etc. So if we're using those simple metaphors just to give us an indication of what each of those levels of maturity are like, let's then have a look at what we would see across those 3 levels. Now, in simple terms, and I'll just use the productivity one, we'll go into this in more detail, but we're looking at the equivalent of mail and chat happening at level 1 and moving through to that cloud-based productivity suite, and then eventually into business integrations and AI support around that, etc. And that's how we work across each of those streams. And we have a number of good vendors that will assist an organization who is making those shifts and those jumps, and we'll talk through it. But let's go through, what would be needed to actually assist an organization making those jumps through those various levels. So first up, let's look at that productivity stream. So in level 1, what we are talking about, as I said, was email, web chat, desktop productivity tools, and siloed tools. We would shift that at level 2, where I said unified cloud communications, cloud productivity, things like cloud storage, particularly document storage, and also intranet applications as such. And then finally through to workflow integrated productivity, things like cloud management tools that are enabling you to do various tasks and particular processes in the organization that are all cloud-based. The ability to look across your enterprise with sophisticated cloud search. And this is also the level where AI-enhanced productivity comes in. You would have seen things, say, in, for instance, Google G Suite or Office 365, where AI is starting to guide a user through things or suggest responses, etc. The main benefits we're going to find across the productivity stream is a significant gain in productivity in white-collar industries. So that's one clear one as we go across that stream into the higher levels of maturity. And it's also necessary for significant mobility and BYO device type strategies that you might want to bring into your organization. Let's quickly look at the communication stream. So in communications, again, at that first level, we're just talking about your corporate telephony, mobile telephony, and pushing social media out. That very quickly, once we lift to the next level of maturity, we are talking about having corporate contact centers generally up in the cloud. And again, that sort of alludes to where we had challenges with contact centers being on-prem based during the crisis. The introduction of soft phones and social media that is now monitored. And finally, pushing into that level 3, we're now looking at omni-channel. So it's beyond the telephone. It's now every angle of social media that's coming in. We have a contact center that's dealing with it. So we're looking at omni-channel technologies, etc. Things like your artificial intelligence communications. That's where you have AI answering the phone or pushing out calls. And things like social commerce coming in there. Business benefits at these levels is the best benefit is for high client touch. So where you've got a business, particularly in retail, for instance, where that client touch is very strongly socially oriented. And what we do notice is where those industries have clients engaging via social media, we need to attain stage 3. We need to be getting up into that omni-channel space. That is where competitive advantage is these days. Looking at workflow, very interesting space. So what we are looking at here now is where we've got things like workflow apps and simple email-based workflow or siloed workflow in the built into the ERP system, for instance, and tactical robotic process automation happening at the base level. When we move up from that, we are starting to look at cloud workflow engines and things like work execution or work operating system type applications, very much like Monday.com, coming into play. And things like your supply chain workflow, etc., not just tied down to one application, etc. Moving up to level 3, we're now getting that artificial intelligence support across RPA or continual improvement workflow and moving towards customer-centric work operating systems. So where we're integrating and we've got very strongly customer-focused processes built around these tools. Most organisations will benefit well from this stream. You know, there's a significant waste reduction here for one. Secondly, you might want to consider using these workflow design or user-based workflow design tools and platforms, work operating systems, or execution platforms as such, like your Monday.coms. In the security space, at the basic level, we're talking about your corporate security, firewalls, single sign-on, and security assessments. It's a fairly straightforward place, and in this era, particularly where we have state-based actors operating in the cybersecurity area, it's probably not enough to be operating at this level. We move this at level 2, we're starting to talk about getting security up to your interactions with your client, right down to things like data loss prevention, zero trust, second factor authentication, and your endpoint security. And we're moving into more proactive security where we're doing audits of your environment. And then finally, we're moving up into full ecosystem security. So not just your clients, but also your partners, your vendors, etc., your full life cycle management of your users. And we're going very strongly into penetration tests and strong active measures for your cyber security aspects of the business. Moving to zero trust will protect from so many security threats. And this is probably one of the clear benefits here. This is where nearly all of the main cloud vendors have gone. Nearly all of those operate. If you consider, for instance, an organization like Google, who operates completely on zero trust, but every single element of their IP sits on their platform. So it's there, and that zero trust is protecting it. And that's why pretty much no matter where you are, whether you're in a Google building or if you're out on the street, etc., when you access those platforms, you're going through a zero trust infrastructure. Likewise, organizations with e-commerce channels really must move to stage 3. If you're significantly focused on e-commerce, you really do need to look at your risk mitigation there, particularly to harden up against state-based actors. The last category here, Workspace, is getting more into the physicality of what we're dealing with collaboration. In simple terms, we're going from office space to the telecommute capability to full global office. And what we're looking at there is, you know, your office-centric operations, etc., but also work hubs and thin clients, all of those sort of operating at that level. And then moving up from there into the ability to enable telecommute, your work from home, things like your video meetings and BYOD and device owners. Now, effectively, a lot of that has actually been enabled with these last few months. So what we do see is that a lot of organisations have started to shift into this level simply to enable work from home. And likewise, at the level 3 level, what we're starting to see here now is organisations that want to enable their operations to operate globally. And that could be, although there's not much travel these days, but being able to cover that, webinars, global office, your web-centric zero trust, and moving on to things like interactive boards, like your Google's Jamboards, etc., or integrated AR, VR. So the main benefits here, the new normal, okay, as it's been called. Cost saves from rationalising office spend and BYOD, and planning for future fit-outs and hubs versus big headquarter operations. So what are some of the considerations for your organisation? What we're looking at here is assessing your organisation's current state, your desired end state, looking at things like step transformations within streams and being able to help your organisation step through each one of those streams to a desired state. Looking at the scalability of your transform cloud-centric organisation. So one of the things about scalability is that many cloud providers do allow that scale up, scale down. And when we have something like COVID happen, and some organisations were impacted in the sense that their operations could not continue, you're looking at having an infrastructure that will scale down just as much as scale up to meet that, and certainly from a cost management perspective. Things like interoperability and open APIs are critical. We're really looking at being able to have every platform that you bring into your operations should have strong interoperability and those open APIs to work with your other technologies. We do want to watch the emerging work operating system or work execution space. This is an area that is really a paradigm change for not only businesses, but also the IT effort. So that's something, again, that is well worth looking at, particularly around maturing collaboration. Change management and executive support are always crucial when we're looking at collaboration initiatives, simply because it touches everybody and it has to be managed. And obviously, executive visibility is another key area there. How Dialog can help you. So quickly, one of the things we can do is look at the maturity model assessment baseline and some executive consulting around where you could look at making improvements and moving to that desired state. We can assist with vendor selection and market due diligence and advocacy. We do that for all of our vendors anyway, but if you've got a specific business or tactical need, we can certainly assist with that. We do point solution procurement and deployment. So if you are looking at implementing one of these technologies, we can assist with that. And likewise, the stream step changes in the maturity model with services support, guiding an organisation through the process of going from one level to the next. We do workflow analysis, deployment and development, and assisting organisations going through that and looking at their workflow tools and the work operating system type tools. And we do look at security assessments and health checks, and particularly making sure that those cloud environments, when they're stood up, are safe and secure. We can also help with cloud mobility roadmap advisory services. We do that with nearly all of our customers in account meetings. We do keep them up to date with the roadmap for our cloud vendors as they're going forward. So one of the things obviously that we can do is assist you with doing that baseline. Where does your organisation sit at the moment, and where might you want to be able to shift from that point? You know, do we want to look at some of those initiatives? Are we comfortable with how we might want to move on to a level of higher maturity with collaboration? We can assist you with that baseline, and we can assist you with those initiatives going forward there. There's our contact details, our corporate contact details as such. But at this stage, I'm more than happy to handle any questions that any of our audience might have. Is there anything there? You can either throw it into the Q&A side of things or do the old raise hand, and I'll see if we can enable you to be able to speak. Any questions there at all? Okay, Brock. Where does a typical organisation that Dialog works with fall into the maturity model? It does vary. Some organisations in certain areas will have, at least that baseline level 1. We typically, and it's a bit hard to say Dialog broadly, but we'd often work with organisations that are fairly on the front foot when it comes to enabling collaboration. So, and that's simply because in a cloud practice, and we've often worked with many customers that are implementing these technologies already, so they tend to be, at least level 2 across the board and moving that way, if not further. In the broader sense, many organisations will vary across the board, but as I did say, in that things like communications and the productivity space, there are a lot of organisations in the last 6 months that have shifted at least into level 2. Simply because they had to provide it. Any other questions there? Okay, Dean, how are organisations testing and learning? Let me see. So testing the technologies, I'm assuming, and also how they're learning about how to move this way. I find that a lot of it happens. Yeah. Okay. So I find a lot of that happens by proof of concepts and trials of the technologies. There'll be a particular business unit that will go in there and do that. Effectively, it often starts that way, and in many cases, when another part of the business sees how that's working for that business unit, it will just push on from there. Sometimes we do get courageous CIOs and or CEOs who just say, you know what, I believe in this, we need to enable this for our organisation, and that push down from the top will really make a difference. So there's a little bit of a mix of both. So often it's a bit of a case of some innovative business unit, and perhaps the head or management within that unit has decided that they're going to use these technologies and push it on. And sometimes it really does get pushed down right from the top. Okay, so follow-up from Dean. What is the approach with multi-generational workforce? And some users are very tech-savvy, others are not. Yeah, the interesting thing there is that our experience with that is that there are a lot of people, even in the older generations now, who in their personal life, just through social media use, etc., are actually starting to really starting to get across some of these technologies quite well. And I'm not just talking those in the 40s and 50s. I'm even north of that. So we do actually find that we've found with some of our organisations that we've done a complete roll through of a fairly innovative technology, like rolling out a Google G Suite or an Office 365 from what they're used to working with on-prem. That often you'll find that there's very little difference between the age groups, more so than I've found with more corporate system rollouts. Sometimes that can be quite challenging, but a lot of the cloud vendors these days do make the products very intuitive, and often it's not that hard to make the leap. But I do find that the older generations are a little bit more tech savvy than we expect these days. Okay, we've got one here from Martin. Okay, so it's largely about companies that are, and especially government, are security risk averse. Where do you see this going from here on in terms of solutions to beef up security for remote workers? Look, I think organisations, it'll be upon themselves to do it. We've seen enough frightening stories out there around data that's leaked out onto a cloud platform, or just a data loss issue that's happened through either social engineering or otherwise. I think organisations, through the very nature of watching what happens within their industries, will have to develop a degree of security sensibility around what they're doing in the cloud space. In many cases, and this is an interesting thing, I did a roadshow through Canberra and Wellington a couple of years back when we had a cybersecurity specialist there from PwC that was saying that where some organisations are thinking of putting their toe in the water now with cloud, and only putting the toe in the water because they're concerned about the security issues. The reality is that those cloud vendors handled the security far better than anybody here could. And I might add, we had people from defence in that audience who were also nodding their head. So it was very much a case of the security is tighter by a lot of these companies than it would be on-prem or where you are operating at the moment. And as I said, as you move to things like Zero Trust, that even strengthens it even more. But would you rather have 600 security specialists from Google looking after your infrastructure, or do you rely on what you have at your current on-prem basis at the moment? So it's an interesting space. There is a natural concern there about it, but often I think with being informed, a lot of organisations and a lot of architects, I might say, and CISOs have come around to understanding the truth of that. Do we have any other questions? I'm mindful of time. We're at half an hour in, so I just thought